Hello everyone and welcome to another MTG Top 10. I'm Nitsa Hone and I bring you guys an MTG related Top 10 list every single Friday. This week we're doing the first of a two-part series of Top 10s that are about my current thoughts on the current limited format, which is coming to an end sort of soon, and that is Aether Revolt. I do a limited review every time a new set is spoiled. My Amonkhet one will be forthcoming, but because I do them before I get a chance to play with the cards, it's impossible to be 100% accurate in my predictions. This is my perspective on the format after having drafted it close to 50 times, and it gives me a chance to talk about the format after I've actually played with it. This week's list will look at the cards that I underrated in my limited review, and next week's will look at the ones that I overrated. For each card, I will tell you where I had it initially and where it is for me now. At number 10, I have Dawn Feathereagle. I wasn't super wrong about this card, but it has definitely overperformed for me. I always thought it was playable and that I would be happy to have two of them in basically any white deck that had at least 15 creatures in it, but it's better than that. It can win you games on its own. The fact that it not only pumps your whole team, but gives you vigilance is often enough to swing a race, and if your opponent is still alive after you get the trigger, it can attack for 3 in the air to finish the job. I definitely like it more than Countless Gear's Renegade, which is what I had initially as the second best white common. I found myself first picking the Eagle in weak packs, but it shouldn't happen too often. That said, you should think of seeing one of these around pick 5 or 6 as a pretty good signal that white is open. At number 9, I have Aether Poisoner. This one's very similar to the Eagle. I didn't completely miss on it. I was within the ballpark when I said it was the third best black common, but it's even better than that. A 2-mana 1/1 that can trade with anything while also providing you energy and servo tokens is pretty amazing in a format where getting energy and servo tokens is important. The Poisoner also happens to be in a color that loves to improvise, so that improves her standing even more. Similar to the Eagle, I would take it first pick in a particularly bad pack, but I'm pretty happy to run as many of these as I can get my hands on in any black deck I play, especially if I'm improvising. And now I think it's the second best black common behind only Daring Demolition. At number 8, I have Destructive Tampering. Since I don't yet do full limited set reviews, which is something I'm beginning with Amonkhet, I didn't actually get a chance to really state my opinion on this card, on Destructive Tampering, and I don't think I should have when talking about the best red commons, because it is not one of the best red commons. However, I should have mentioned it in my archetype guide in both the red-green and white-red archetypes, as those aggressive red decks love to have one copy of this card. I thought of this card initially as a solid sideboard option, but it can just win games in some situations and blow up problem artifacts in others. It is castable often enough that every red deck that wants to attack every turn should be playing it, as it can allow for huge blowout wins. I still would not be mainboarding more than one, though if after game 1 I saw my opponent also had tons of artifacts, I would be happy to bring in a second. Next up, we have Audacious Infiltrator at number 7. This guy was on my radar, and I thought of him as the 4th best white common, but he's really the 3rd best, and he isn't super far behind Dawn Feathereagle. This guy was easy to underestimate. 2-mana 3/1s are usually solid, but nothing exciting. But this guy has a few things going for him. His ability to avoid being blocked by artifact creatures is better than I expected it to be. Sometimes the opponent just has to trade down to kill the guy because their servos and such can't block it. Also, many of the strong, playable vehicles have crew 3, and there isn't another 2-drop with 3 power who can crew them, so he's one of the best pilots for those vehicles. Third, he actually works pretty well with Revolt, since you can often set your opponent up to trade their 2/2 for it and then get a Revolt trigger. He's good for roll-up Revolt decks because you can play him early, and he's the kind of card that your opponent often wants to block with a 2/2 or a 1-power creature when they can. So yeah, Audacious Infiltrator is a great white card, and in the end, I think is now the 3rd best white common in the format. Okay, from number 6 on, we are moving into the more embarrassing territory, where I really whiffed on cards. Not just underrated a little bit, but just was plain wrong about in many ways. With Reverse Engineer, I underrated it very badly. In my experience in the format, playing an improvised deck tends to be one of the best things you can do, and in those decks, it is not hard to pay 2 blue mana to draw 3 with this thing, and even if you don't really get there on improvise, I'm pretty happy to pay 4 mana for 3 cards, or even 5. This format has a lot of board stalls in it, and this is the kind of card that can power you out of that thanks to card advantage. I find myself taking it over all the blue uncommons and commons in the set that aren't Windkin Raiders or Skyship Plunderers, so it's the 3rd best uncommon in blue, but also, of all the commons and uncommons, still the 3rd best. At number 5, I have Chandra's Revolution, which I was pretty wrong about. But the top 4 cards are all cards I was even more wrong about, so get ready for those. I like Chandra's Revolution in my limited review, but not enough. I called it the 3rd best red common, putting it behind Shock and Aether Chaser, which are both great cards too, don't get me wrong, but Chandra's Revolution is better than either of them, and I'm usually pretty happy to start a draft by taking it. I only think one red uncommon is better than Chandra's Revolution 2, and that's Hungry Flames. Chandra's Revolution just kills a ton of things in this format, while also locking your opponent off of a mana, which sometimes means an entire color. Daring Demolition is the only common in the format that I think is better. So yeah, I was really wrong about Chandra's Revolution, but again, would you believe I was even more wrong about these next 4 cards? At number 4, I have Fenhauler. This guy didn't crack my list of best black commons, but he should have. I generally take him over Cruel Finality, and by the latter point of the Aether Revolt packs, If I have grabbed a ton of artifacts, he goes way up in my pick order. Playing him on turn 4 or 5 isn't a stretch. I knew he would be solid in black artifact-heavy decks, but like I did with Ambitious Infiltrator, I underestimated how big of a deal it is that he can't be blocked by artifact creatures. In the Hauler's case, it's an even bigger deal, since it often means he just can't die in combat because the opponent can't double block and kill him because one of their blockers is an artifact. Fen Haulers have won me a lot of games, and I actually like him more than Bastion Inventor or Sweatworks Brawler in improvised heavy decks, though it's worth noting that Sweatworks Brawler is better in a straight aggro deck. Making him the best common improviser overall, though, and a key payoff card that you want if you're in a black improvised deck. At number 3, I have Iron Tread Crusher, a card I was pretty down on in my limited review. I said it was the worst of the vehicles in Aether Revolt, when in reality that would be Mobile Garrison. I had a hard time getting vehicles right the first time around. I was right about Renegade Freighter being great, but other than that I didn't do great in Kaladesh. This is my vehicle mistake this time. I based it on the fact that Crew 3 vehicles in Kaladesh really underwhelmed me, but it turns out the Crusher is just big enough and just easy enough to crew that it is a great finisher in an aggro deck. There are tons of 2 and 3 mana creatures with 3 power in this format who can pilot this thing with no problem. I don't usually like more than 1 in my deck, but I'm generally pretty happy to have 1 in any aggressive deck, and that's much better than I was willing to give it credit for. At number 2, we get to places where I've really screwed up, and we already know that I screwed up a fair amount on my limited review, but one color suffered more than any other when it came to underrating cards, and that's green. Both number 2 and number 1 are green cards. Lifecraft Cavalry, well, what can I say about it but sorry? I didn't include the Cavalry at all on my list of best green commons, but it is the second best green common for me now, and a very strong sign that green is open when I see it. It is one of the best creatures with Revolt because its fail case is still a reasonable creature, a 5 mana 4/4 Trampler, and because of its higher mana cost, it is easier to manufacture the death of one of your creatures by the time you play it, even if you don't have some sweet synergies like Renegade Map. If I draft a deck with 4 of them as my only 5 drops, I feel pretty good about it. It is a very powerful common, the kind that can just signal the end of the game for your opponent when you play it if they can't deal with it, and it's bigger than basically all of the common and uncommon creatures in the format when it comes into play with the counters. Would you believe, though, that there's a green card I was even more wrong about? And that card is Scrounging Bandar. This cat monkey's the real deal, and while I noted in my archetype guide that the monkey was a solid card and had great synergies with both black-green +1/+1 counters and with Revolt, I don't think I did a good job of reflecting that in my actual ranking of green commons. I didn't have it on my list of best green commons at all, and it is by far the best green common, so that's a pretty big mistake. This is another card that I would play as many copies of as the table's willing to give me. It just has high value at all stages of the game. On turn 2, it gives you a 2/2, which is great, and in the later game, you can use it to pump an evasive creature, or pump a creature so it is so big that your opponent can't block it effectively. It is probably the best 2-drop creature in the whole set not named Aether Chaser. So basically, my list for best green commons was completely off, as I left off 2 that I decided in the end were the best green commons. Whoops. Well, that does it for this week's MTG Top 10. Next week, I'll be back for the other side of the coin, the Aether Revolt cards that I overrated the most in my limited review. Let's point out some more of my mistakes. But anyway, if you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to click the like button. If you have any questions about this list, suggestions for a future list, or you want to point out even more of my errors on my set review, you can do it in the comments below. And if you want to make sure you catch more of my content, including MTG Top 10 lists, draft videos, and more, don't forget to subscribe. Additionally, my content is sponsored in part by 5colorcombo.com, a great website for all of your Magic the Gathering needs. They even have an app that can help you practice drafting Aether Revolt, and soon it will also be able to help you draft Amonkhet. And they also have a store where you can use my discount code NEEDSAHONE5 to get a 5% discount. Thanks for watching.